Imagine walking into an exam you've barely studied for. Around you, everyone looks exhausted. Some people stayed up until 3 in the morning. Others have highlighted almost every page of their textbook. They've spent weeks reading, rereading, underlining, taking notes, and trying to memorize everything they possibly could. You sit down, you finish the exam. A few days later, the results come back, and somehow you scored higher than almost everyone else. Now imagine something even stranger. A month later, while everyone else has forgotten almost everything they studied, you still remember most of it. Not because you have a photographic memory, not because you're naturally gifted, and definitely not because you studied longer than everyone else. You simply understood something that most people never do. Learning has almost nothing to do with how many hours you study. It has everything to do with what your brain is actually doing during those hours. That sounds almost unfair, because we've been told the exact opposite our entire lives. We've been taught that good students study longer, that successful people work harder, that if you want better results, the answer is always more effort, more hours, more pages, more coffee, more sleepless nights. But what if the problem isn't that you're not studying enough? What if you've simply been using a system that your brain was never designed for? Think about it. Have you ever finished reading an entire chapter, closed the book, and immediately realized you couldn't explain a single page you just read? Or maybe you've highlighted so much text that the page ended up looking more colorful than your own notes. For a moment, it felt like you understood everything. Then someone asked you a simple question. So, what was the main idea? And suddenly your mind went completely blank. That isn't because you're bad at learning. It's because your brain played one of its oldest tricks on you. Your brain loves familiarity. The more often it sees something, the more it convinces you that you've learned it. But familiarity is not memory. Recognition is not understanding. Imagine I show you a photograph of your childhood home. You'll recognize it instantly. Now close your eyes. Can you tell me exactly how many windows were on the front? Where was the mailbox? How many steps led to the front door? Most people can't. Not because they weren't paying attention, because recognizing something and recalling it are completely different mental processes. Unfortunately, almost everything we're taught in school trains recognition. Very little trains recall. And recall is where learning actually happens. More than a century ago, a German psychologist named Hermann Ebbinghaus became fascinated by a simple question. Why do we forget? Instead of studying other people, he used himself as the experiment. He spent years memorizing meaningless syllables, testing his memory over and over again, recording exactly how much he forgot each day. What he discovered completely changed the science of learning. Our brains begin forgetting information almost immediately after we learn it. Not because they're broken, because forgetting is actually a feature. Imagine trying to remember every single conversation you've ever had, every license plate you've ever seen, every face you've passed on the street, every commercial you've watched. Your brain would be overwhelmed. So instead, it constantly asks one question. Is this information important enough to keep? If the answer appears to be no, it quietly deletes it. Which means forgetting isn't your brain failing. It's your brain doing exactly what it was designed to do. The real question isn't, how can I study more? It's, how do I convince my brain that this information is worth keeping? That single question changes everything. Because once you understand how memory works, studying stops feeling like a battle. It starts feeling like engineering. Think of your brain as a garden. Most people treat studying like throwing thousands of seeds onto dry ground. Then they get frustrated when nothing grows. A few seeds survive. Most disappear. Not because the seeds were bad, because they were never planted properly. The best learners do something different. Instead of throwing more seeds, they prepare the soil. They water it consistently. They come back before the plants die. Slowly, almost invisibly, those tiny roots begin connecting beneath the surface. That's exactly how memory works. Every idea you truly remember has roots connected to dozens of other ideas. Nothing exists alone. Your brain isn't a filing cabinet. It's a giant web. Every new piece of knowledge needs somewhere to attach itself. The more connections it creates, the stronger it becomes. That's why you can remember almost every scene from your favorite movie, but struggle to remember 3 pages from a textbook you read yesterday. The movie wasn't just information. It was emotion, conflict, characters, curiosity. Your brain wasn't trying to memorize it. It simply couldn't help remembering it. Because emotion tells the brain, this matters. And your brain listens. That's also why. The best teachers you've ever had probably weren't the smartest people you've ever met. They were storytellers. They made ideas feel alive. They didn't force information into your head. They invited your curiosity to pull it in. Curiosity is one of the most powerful learning tools that exists, because curiosity changes the role of your brain. Instead of asking, how long until this is over? It begins asking, what happens next? That tiny shift changes everything. People often believe motivation comes first, then action, then results. But psychology suggests something much more interesting. Action creates curiosity. Curiosity creates attention. Attention creates memory. Memory creates mastery. In other words, you don't become motivated before you begin. You become motivated because you begin. That explains one of the strangest experiences almost everyone has had. You've probably spent an entire afternoon avoiding a task that would only take 20 minutes. You cleaned your room, you checked your messages, you reorganized your desktop, you watched just one more video. Anything except the work itself. But the moment you finally started, something unexpected happened. It wasn't nearly as difficult as your mind had predicted. 10 minutes later, you were completely focused. An hour passed without you noticing. Where did that motivation suddenly come from? It didn't appear out of nowhere. It was hiding behind the first step. Your brain almost always exaggerates the discomfort of beginning. Once momentum takes over, resistance begins disappearing on its own. And this simple idea might be the biggest difference between people who learn incredibly fast and people who spend years believing they're simply bad at studying. Because the fastest learners don't wait until they feel ready. They know something everyone else overlooks. The hardest part of learning isn't understanding. It isn't memorizing. It isn't even practicing. The hardest part is convincing your brain to begin. And once you understand why your brain fights the starting line so fiercely, you'll never look at procrastination the same way again. Your brain doesn't hate learning. It hates uncertainty. From an evolutionary perspective, uncertainty usually meant danger. Thousands of years ago, trying something unfamiliar could have led to injury, starvation, or death. So your brain evolved to be cautious. It became incredibly good at pushing you toward things that felt safe, predictable, and immediately rewarding. Today, you're probably not running away from wild animals. You're trying to finish a chapter on biology. You're learning a new programming language. You're studying for a certification. Objectively, none of these things are dangerous. But your brain doesn't evaluate them logically. It evaluates them emotionally. Every difficult task comes with uncertainty. What if I don't understand this? What if I fail the exam? What if I spend hours studying and still get a bad grade? Those questions create discomfort, and your brain has an incredibly simple solution. Avoid the discomfort. Open YouTube. Check Instagram. Reply to a message. Get a snack. Do literally anything that provides an immediate reward. Within seconds, the uncomfortable feeling disappears. Your brain notices that. It quietly learns a lesson. When I avoid difficult work, I feel better. That tiny lesson becomes a habit. Repeat it enough times, and procrastination stops being a decision. It becomes your default setting. That's why motivation is such an unreliable strategy. Most people believe motivation comes first, then action follows. But in reality, the opposite is usually true. Action comes first. Motivation catches up later. Think about the last time you didn't feel like exercising. The hardest moment wasn't halfway through the workout. It wasn't the last set. It was putting on your shoes. Or think about reading a book. The hardest part wasn't page 50, it was opening page 1. Starting is where your brain creates the most resistance. Once you begin, something remarkable happens. Your attention narrows. The outside world becomes quieter. Minutes pass without you noticing. Psychologists call this the Zeigarnik effect. Our brains naturally want to finish what we've already started. An unfinished task creates mental tension. A started task pulls us forward. That's why one of the simplest ways to study more isn't forcing yourself to finish a chapter. It's making the beginning almost impossible to avoid. Tell yourself you're only going to study for 5 minutes, not 2 hours, not until you're exhausted, just 5 minutes. It sounds almost laughably easy, and that's exactly the point. You're not trying to trick your brain into working harder. You're lowering the emotional barrier to getting started. Once the engine is running, momentum does most of the work, but starting is only half the battle. The next mistake almost everyone makes is believing that every page in a textbook deserves equal attention. It doesn't. Imagine you're handed a 1,000-piece puzzle. Would you randomly grab pieces from every corner of the box, or would you start with the edges? Would you find the pieces that create the biggest structure first? Learning works the same way. Not every fact carries the same weight. Some ideas unlock dozens of others. Some chapters appear again and again in exams. Some concepts become the foundation for everything that follows. Others are tiny details you'll rarely need. Yet many students spend exactly the same amount of time on both. Being busy feels productive, but being selective is far more powerful. This is where one of the most misunderstood principles of productivity becomes incredibly useful. The Pareto principle, often called the 80-20 rule. It suggests that a small percentage of inputs often produce the majority of results. In learning, that doesn't mean ignoring the remaining material. It means identifying the concepts that create the greatest understanding. Ask yourself a different question. Instead of asking, "What else should I study?" ask, "What ideas make the rest of this chapter easier to understand?" That question changes everything. Because learning isn't about collecting isolated facts. It's about building a framework. Once the framework exists, details have somewhere to live. Without it, every new fact feels random. Imagine trying to assemble a building without first constructing the foundation. You'd keep adding bricks. Eventually, everything would collapse under its own weight. Knowledge works the same way. Strong learners don't memorize first, they understand first. Then memorization becomes dramatically easier. But there's another illusion that quietly wastes thousands of hours: reading. Most people love reading because it feels productive. The pages keep turning, the words look familiar. Everything seems to make sense. The problem is that your brain is mostly recognizing information, not retrieving it. Recognition creates confidence. Retrieval creates memory. Those two are not the same. Imagine preparing for a basketball game. Instead of practicing free throws, you spend 3 hours watching highlight videos. You understand the mechanics. You recognize good technique. You feel inspired. But when it's finally your turn to shoot, your body hasn't practiced anything. Studying passively works the same way. Watching information enter your brain is not the same as pulling information back out. And that's exactly why one learning technique consistently outperforms almost everything else. Instead of asking your eyes to read the answer again, ask your brain to produce it. Close the book. Look away from your notes. Now explain the idea in your own words. Write everything you remember. Draw the diagram from memory. Answer questions before checking the solution. Every time your brain struggles to retrieve information, it becomes slightly better at finding that information again later. It feels harder. That's why many people avoid it. Ironically, that difficulty is exactly what makes it effective. Learning should not always feel easy. Easy often means you're recognizing. Desirable difficulty often means you're remembering. One of the greatest physicists in history had an interesting habit whenever he learned something new. He believed that if you couldn't explain an idea simply, you probably didn't understand it deeply enough. So instead of collecting complicated explanations, he simplified them again and again and again, until even a child could follow the logic. That approach has become famous as the Feynman technique. But its real power isn't the method itself. It's what the method reveals. The moment you try teaching an idea, your brain immediately exposes every gap in your understanding. Suddenly you notice where your explanation becomes vague, where you rely on memorized words instead of genuine understanding, where your confidence quietly disappears. Those moments are frustrating. They're also incredibly valuable, because confusion isn't the enemy of learning. It's the beginning of learning. Every question you can't answer points directly toward what you should study next. Instead of fearing those gaps, the fastest learners chase them, because every gap they close makes the entire structure stronger. And once you combine retrieval with explanation, something fascinating begins to happen. Information stops feeling borrowed. It starts feeling like your own. That's the moment learning becomes faster. Not because your brain suddenly works harder, but because you're finally giving it exactly what it has been asking for all along. There's one final piece that almost nobody talks about, and without it, everything you've learned so far becomes surprisingly fragile. Imagine spending weeks building a beautiful house. The walls are perfect. The roof is finished. The windows are installed. Everything looks complete. But the foundation was never allowed to harden. Sooner or later, cracks begin to appear. Eventually, the entire structure starts collapsing. That's exactly what happens when you try to learn without giving your brain time to strengthen new memories. Most people think learning happens while they're studying. It doesn't. Studying is only the beginning. A large part of learning happens after you close the book. Your brain continues working long after you've stopped paying attention. While you sleep, billions of neurons replay patterns of activity from the day. Connections that were weak become stronger. Important information is transferred into longer-term storage. Other information quietly disappears. In a sense, sleep is your brain's overnight editing process. It decides what deserves to stay and what can safely be forgotten. That's why sacrificing sleep to study longer often produces the opposite result. You may spend 2 extra hours reading, but if your brain never gets the chance to organize that information properly, much of the effort simply fades away. Think about it this way. If someone handed you thousands of important documents, you could throw them all into a pile. Or you could spend time filing them into the right folders. Which system would help you find them again 6 months later? Your brain faces that same decision every night. Sleep isn't laziness, it's part of learning itself. Movement matters too. Not because walking magically makes you smarter, but because your brain depends on your body far more than most people realize. After sitting still for hours, your attention naturally begins to decline. Your mind wanders. Information becomes harder to process. Sometimes the fastest way to solve a difficult problem isn't staring at it longer. It's standing up, taking a short walk, stretching for a few minutes, giving your brain fresh oxygen and a chance to reset. Have you ever noticed that some of your best ideas appear in the shower, or while you're walking, or just after you've stopped trying so hard? That's not an accident. Your brain often solves problems in the background while your conscious attention is elsewhere. Learning isn't just about intense focus. It's also about creating space for your mind to connect ideas without constant pressure. But perhaps the biggest mistake people make is believing they need the perfect study schedule before they can begin. The perfect desk, the perfect notebook, the perfect app, the perfect playlist, the perfect mood, the perfect amount of motivation. It's another illusion, because perfection is one of procrastination's favorite disguises. Every day you spend designing. The perfect system is another day you aren't actually learning. The students who improve the fastest rarely have perfect systems, they simply have consistent ones. A simple notebook used every day will outperform the most beautiful planning app that's abandoned after a week. A focused 20-minute study session, repeated consistently, is more powerful than a single 8-hour marathon once a month. Learning is less like winning a sprint. It's more like planting a forest. You don't see dramatic changes overnight. At first, everything feels invisible. You wonder whether anything is happening at all. Then one day, you realize you're solving problems that once felt impossible. Concepts that used to confuse you now seem obvious. Ideas begin connecting automatically. What changed wasn't your intelligence. It was your accumulated practice. Every small session became another layer, another connection, another root growing beneath the surface where nobody could see it. People often admire experts because they make difficult things look effortless. A skilled pianist seems relaxed. An experienced programmer writes code almost without thinking. A fluent speaker moves through another language naturally. From the outside, it looks like talent. From the inside, it's usually thousands of tiny repetitions quietly stacked on top of one another. That's the secret most people never notice. Mastery rarely arrives through one life-changing breakthrough. It grows through ordinary days, repeated with extraordinary consistency. So if you're waiting for the moment when you'll finally feel ready, stop waiting. That feeling may never come. Start before you feel confident. Start before you feel motivated. Start before you believe you're capable. Because confidence is not the price you pay before taking action. It's the reward your brain gives you after you've taken action enough times. Remember where we started. We imagined someone walking into an exam with less stress, finishing with better results, and remembering more long after everyone else had forgotten. That person wasn't using a secret shortcut. They weren't cheating. They simply stopped confusing time with learning. They stopped measuring progress by how many hours they studied and started measuring it by how often they challenged their memory, built meaningful connections, and returned to what mattered most. The truth is, your brain is far more powerful than you've probably been led to believe. It was never designed to absorb endless information in one sitting. It was designed to adapt, to connect, to strengthen what is used, and to discard what is ignored. Once you understand that, studying becomes less about forcing yourself to work harder and more about working with the way your mind naturally learns. So the next time you sit down to study, don't ask yourself, how many hours should I spend? Ask a better question. What can I do in the next 20 minutes that my future self will still remember next month? That single question might change the way you learn for the rest of your life. Because extraordinary learners aren't extraordinary because they know more. They're extraordinary because they've learned how to learn. And that's a skill that stays with you long after every exam is over. If this video changed the way you think about learning, don't let it become another idea that disappears tomorrow. Choose just one technique. Close your notes and explain what you've learned from memory. Study for 20 focus minutes instead of waiting for the perfect mood. Teach one concept to a friend. Take a short walk before your next study session. Do something, anything that turns today's insight into tomorrow's habit. Knowledge doesn't change your life. Applied knowledge does. And years from now, the difference between the person you are today and the person you'll become may come down to a surprisingly small decision. Not whether you learned more, but whether you finally learned how to learn.